Hello, my name is Abra, and I'm here to tell you why the Midway is the only Tier 10 CV you'll ever need. There's many factors that go into determining a ship's worth in this game: speed, armor, gunpowder, reload time, range, accuracy, the list goes on. With carriers, it gets a little more simplified. At the end of the day, the only thing that really matters with carriers is consistency. Every carrier has that one thing that they're best at, but I think what gets overlooked a lot is consistency. For example, a triple Citadel drop from Hakuryu AP bombs is worth 20,400 damage. A triple Citadel drop from the MVR will net you 26,400 damage, but you have to ask yourself, how often are you actually hitting all three Citadels when you drop? Because you aren't doing any damage over time with AP bombs. You aren't forcing a ship to burn damage control party that your team can then take advantage of. Very common scenario I find myself in when I play the Midway is I set up multiple fires on someone with my HE bombs, and they have to burn their DCP if they don't want to take a million fire damage. And then as soon as their DCP is on cooldown, my teammates on the surface get to set multiple permafires for free. The damage that you allow your team to do in the Midway is severely underrated. And furthermore, if you don't triple Citadel with AP bombs, it's just worse than the Midway off the bat. Because if you're not doing the full 20,000 plus damage, then you're already worse. Mathematically, you're already worse. Think about it like this. Would you rather do 20,000 damage in one burst, or would you rather do 14,000 damage up front that also burns for another 10k damage, and it opens up the possibility of even more fire damage from other sources? The choice there seems pretty obvious to me, but the scales tip even further when you consider plane maneuverability. Almost every single bomber squadron at Tier 10 requires you to set up a strike in a north-south orientation, meaning you have to change your flight path to make the drop correctly, and oftentimes you have to make the last-second adjustment because the enemy is actively dodging. No CV is better at this aspect than the Midway. Other carriers have to do all of their attack angle adjustments before they start the strike, and if the enemy is actively turning at the appropriate times, you will likely be forced to drop sideways and miss most of your bombs. In the Midway, you can take the absolute straightest path possible towards your target, and even if they are actively dodging, you can make the adjustments necessary to make an accurate drop without sacrificing time and losing planes. The maneuverability of the dive bombers is insane, and no other carrier comes close in this regard. And it gets really embarrassing for other carriers when you consider the most important factor of Midway dive bombers: they can strike anyone. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and other carriers. No one is safe. I'll go even further to say that I believe Midway dive bombers are the most lethal air-to-surface weapons in the game versus destroyers. Which brings me to my next point: versatility. Every other carrier in World of Warships, you basically have to ignore destroyers most of the time. And if you want to attack a destroyer, it has to be a pre-planned attack with rockets. Even then, all the enemy destroyer has to do is sail in a north-south way against the attack, and they will take minimal damage. You can forget about doing any damage to destroyers with AP bombs. It is quite literally a waste of time. Torpedoes are basically impossible to land on any destroyer who is actively dodging, and skip bombers are usually only good for one bomb hit unless the destroyer is AFK straight sailing, and in that case even the Audacious could have gotten the job done. In the Midway, it's helpful to plan strikes out, but if you need to change your target mid-flight, you can do that with 2 out of the 3 squadron types. I can't tell you how many times I set out a squadron of dive bombers or rockets with the intended target being a battleship or cruiser, and then all of a sudden a destroyer gets spotted by me or someone else, and now I have the opportunity to do damage to an enemy destroyer who's caught out in a bad spot. I don't know if anyone ever told you this, but killing destroyers wins games most of the time. There's absolutely nothing that you can do about your destroyers throwing their ships away and losing the game for your team, unfortunately. But what you can do is be the one who makes that happen for the enemy team. Now let's talk about the torpedoes, because I think they are massively underrated. A full 6-pack of torps onto a battleship will net you around 15 to 20k damage, depending on the torpedo protection that you're hitting. I will admit that most strikes in the Midway will only get you 5 torpedo hits because the spread is very wide, and if the enemy is turning, you're likely to miss at least one. What I love about the Midway torps, though, is how you can choose to use them differently depending on what you need. If you know you're going into a heavily AA defended area and you need to get torps off, all you have to do is drop off a set immediately after takeoff, and you can use a one and done strat just like the Nikimov does. If you find a battleship out in the open, you're basically guaranteed to get 2 strikes off. They're not going to shoot down enough planes where you can't get at least 2 off if they're alone. While 20 to 40,000 damage for the whole squadron isn't the best damage numbers in the aerial torpedo game, it's nothing to sneeze at. Especially considering the torpedoes are easily the weakest squadron that the Midway has in terms of comparing damage to other CVs. And although the damage from the torps isn't as good as Hakuryu or Nikimov, I think that they're vastly easier to land on a dodging target than those of Nikimov. And in that vein, I feel like that's a very good description of the Midway in general. It's better at hitting enemies who are actually dodging. There is no shortage of videos and clips of basically stationary battleships getting power farmed by other carriers, and everybody loses their mind. Nikimov OP, how broken are Hakuryu torpedoes, etc, etc, etc. I look at the game like this. If the enemy isn't very good and you're just potato farming, then it doesn't really matter what ship you're in. The enemy was likely going to lose regardless of your ship choice. I love the Midway because it's the best carrier at hurting good players. If you look at some of the best player stats in WoWs, they win around 65% of the time, which tells me that roughly 35% of the time that you queue up for a game, it's over before it started in both directions, meaning 70% of the time. The game is not won or lost on your actions alone. What I'm interested in is that 30%. Those times where my actions are going to define the outcome of the game. And in those tight games where every move I make matters, I want to be able to do for my team whatever is necessary. Every game is different. The best way to win a game is to eliminate or nullify whoever the most dangerous target at the current moment is. That target will change from game to game and moment to moment. So what better way to be prepared for victory than to sail the only tier 10 carrier that can quite literally do it all? If you look at the ship stats that the game gives you, and that's as far as you're willing to look into it, then it would seem Midway is a very middle-of-the-road carrier. But if the game had an efficiency rating next to each of the squadrons, I think people would be blown away. There are no such statistics in the game, but after several thousand games, I feel pretty confident in guessing some of them. And by efficiency, I mean how often does the full strike actually hit for 100% potential damage. In carrier versus battleship dive bomb attacks, I would guess Hakuryu bombs at about 25%, MVR around 15%, and Midway leading the pack at about 70%. This is ignoring the fact that Wargaming lists Midway's potential bomb damage at 11,000, which is ridiculous. They're never going to do that much damage. It's a really poorly represented number. Well, let's ignore that. Skip bombers are wildly inconsistent. I would guess somewhere around 30 to 40%. All of those numbers are again assuming that every bomb hits the target. All those stats go down when you're targeting cruisers. After all, they're smaller for the most part. As far as carrier versus destroyer bomb runs, I think Midway is the only carrier to consistently hit the target at all with meaningful damage. With a standstill dummy target, I would say HE carpet bombs would be the only competitor in this category, and I would say the efficiencies are similar, but Midway's damage is probably triple that of the Audacious versus destroyers. I also absolutely glossed over the fact that Midway rocket planes are the fastest planes in the game at tier 10. I use the stock rockets on Midway to have faster aircraft prep time, and even those cruise at 173 knots before captain skills or equipment. The Tiny Tims aren't very good, but the Corsairs and the HFARs are the easiest HE rockets to hit in the game. with the fastest time to target after click. The MVR's rockets are faster, but those are AP rockets, and that's a whole different conversation for a different day. So yeah, the Midway is kinda goated, and if you want to try playing aircraft carrier, you should definitely pick it up. I stream live on Twitch almost every single day. If you want to come stop by and ask me anything, feel free. Or if you just want to hang out and watch, that's cool too. I'm going to let the rest of this game play out, because it was a good one, but thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.